Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. Today, we're taking a look at, well, a really fascinating and timely topic, the evolving world of sex work, specifically within the gig economy. We'll be focusing on a recent article from The Economist about Sweden's controversial new law, and we'll unpack it with some critical questions, contrasting perspectives, and maybe some deeper context. Our mission today is, I suppose, to go beyond just summarizing what Sweden is doing and why. We're going to scrutinize the actual evidence and the broader implications, drawing on some truly insightful background material. It's a complex area, Definitions are blurring, and public policy is really trying to catch up with, well, rapidly changing technology and social norms.
That's absolutely right. We'll certainly examine the core arguments presented by The Economist. But then we'll dig a bit deeper, maybe challenge some underlying assumptions, highlight critical omissions perhaps, and consider alternative approaches that are gaining traction globally. The goal for you, our listener, is to move beyond just a simple overview and provoke some truly nuanced thought about a very sensitive, but let's face it, important issue.
Okay, so let's begin with Sweden. It's a country that, historically, has been known for sexual liberalism. President Eisenhower even famously fumed back in 1960 that its people tended towards sin, nudity, and drunkenness. Bit strong, maybe? It was also, the second country in the world to legalize all forms of pornography back in 1971? Yet, when it comes to prostitution itself, Sweden has taken a decidedly different, maybe more restrictive path. In 1999, Sweden originated what's become known as the Nordic model. This model criminalizes the purchase of sex, but crucially, not its sale. The stated aim here is to reduce demand and protect, who they deem to be vulnerable women. And this approach has since spread, hasn't it? Influencing laws in places like France, Ireland, Israel.
Even the American state of Maine, yeah. And Scotland is currently considering it too. What's particularly striking now, though, is how Sweden is attempting to sort of bolt this real-world Nordic model onto the digital landscape. As of July 1st, 2025, a new Swedish law comes into force. It criminalizes paying for live porn on platforms like OnlyFans, though interestingly, the performers themselves are exempt from prosecution.
Exempt, right. But the buyers face penalties.
Up to a year in prison, potentially.
Wow. And this new law arrives just as sex workers are increasingly moving their operations online. We're seeing a real blurring of lines in this space, aren't we? Especially for younger generations. There was that stat, 14% of young Americans say they'd consider selling content on OnlyFans, and 16% would consider becoming a sugar baby.
And what's even more interesting is how they perceive it. Polls show about half of Gen Z don't even classify sugaring as sex work.
Not like traditional brothel work, anyway.
Exactly. That's still typically seen as more exploitative. The Economist article notes that supporters of the Nordic model often look back, to abolitionist views from the 1920s. They hold this belief that buying sex is always inherently exploitative, and that strong restrictions are needed, both to protect vulnerable individuals and, to crush demand. They often suggest that many individuals enter sex work due to things like childhood abuse or poverty, rather than out of genuine free choice.
Right. The lack of choice argument.
And therefore, they should be rehabilitated. That's the term often used.
The article shares some really powerful, quite heartbreaking stories that illustrate this perspective. It highlights the case of Samuel Volland, for example, who turned to prostitution after childhood bullying and a traumatic sexual assault. He described dissociating during sex, just completely disconnected. It's quite grim.
Yeah, and then there's that research by Sweden's Toledo charity. They interviewed 120 commercial pornography performers and found a staggering 88% had been sexually abused as children.
88%.
And 69% had attempted suicide. These are really concerning numbers. So building on this, the Swedish government argues that since virtual sex work also carries risks of harm,
which it undoubtedly can,
it should receive the same legal treatment as in-person sex. Sweden's Minister for Gender Equality, Nina Larsson, has even suggested that digital prostitution can be a gateway to selling sex in person.
The gateway argument. Okay. And as proof of success for the existing, the original Nordic model, supporters often point to that reported fall. The share of Swedish men who say they've ever paid for sex dropped from 14% in '96 to 9% in 2017.
And they also cite a noticeable drop in visible street prostitution. That's often presented as evidence of the model's effectiveness.
Right, but this is precisely where we need to, stress test these claims a bit. The evidence that the Nordic model truly protects sex workers or permanently shrinks demand remains, frankly, weak. multiple academic reviews, and there's a detailed 2024 Scottish government briefing, too. They found little concrete proof that punishing buyers effectively reduces exploitation.
So what does it do then?
Well, often it just drives the trade further underground.
Exactly.
Makes it riskier.
Okay, let's delve into that. Does punishing buyers actually work as intended?
I mean, The Economist notes that reported drop in Swedish men paying for sex. But you mentioned background material. What does that add?
Well, it adds a crucial detail that really shifts the perspective. Swedish authorities now estimate, get this, that 80% of domestic sex purchasers now buy abroad.
80%. So they're not stopping. They're just going elsewhere.
Exactly. That's not demand elimination, is it? It points directly to what we'd call demand substitution. People are just taking their money somewhere else, often through sex tourism.
Right. Okay, that's a big caveat.
Huge. And then consider the supposed decline in visible street markets. That coincides directly with the rise of encrypted classifieds and dating apps. Technology.
So the causality is muddy.
Very muddy. It's genuinely hard to definitively say the law caused the decline, or if it was simply a natural technological shift from street to web that actually might have preceded the law's full impact. The timing is really important here.
And here's another surprising detail I saw that complicates the picture. Swedish police briefings actually show a growing share of suspects under 30.
Younger buyers, right?
Yeah. Which really challenges the idea that normative shaming, or even the law itself, is effectively deterring younger buyers.
It does suggest that the headline demand drop might be more of a statistical artifact. Maybe older men stopped, but younger ones are finding new ways.
Rather than a genuine policy success.
Exactly. Which brings us to a fundamental question. Is online sex work intrinsically as exploitative as, say, traditional street prostitution? The Economist article certainly highlights that harm exists online. It cites those cramped, often filthy cubicles in Colombian webcam studios.
Yeah, where women might keep less than 15% of their earnings.
Right. And the prevalence of doxing, where personal information is maliciously published online, that's a serious risk.
It absolutely is. But the background material highlights a much wider agency spectrum, doesn't it?
It does. Think about OnlyFans creators, for instance. They can often set their own prices, they can block specific users, and they frequently keep up to 80% of their revenue. That's a very different picture.
And the risk profile is different, too. Physical violence drops sharply online, you'd imagine.
It generally does, although, as you said, doxing and non-consensual recording risks do rise.
So lumping both physical and virtual under one blanket prohibition, it seems problematic.
It risks criminalizing comparatively safer livelihoods while potentially leaving those high-risk offline sectors maybe under-regulated. It's a key distinction to make.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then there's the fundamental challenge of enforcement, on a borderless internet. While Sweden can theoretically prosecute payments routed through Swedish banks,
That seems straightforward enough.
but things like VPNs, cryptocurrency, and platforms headquartered abroad complicate jurisdiction significantly. How do you police that effectively?
Like trying to ban file sharing back in the day.
Exactly. Past experience suggests high enforcement costs for very marginal deterrence. And those are resources that could perhaps be much more effectively targeted towards genuine coercion and trafficking.
Right. And what about that gateway claim? The idea that online work inevitably leads to offline prostitution.
Yeah, The Economist touches on it. But our background material notes that, well, the longitudinal data on this is pretty sparse. There was a 2023 Norwegian survey, though. 312 OnlyFans creators. It found that only 11% later sold in-person services.
Only 11%. Okay.
And what's really interesting is that this is actually lower than the 17% who later left sex work altogether.
Huh. So it might be an exit ramp for some?
It suggests the causal arrow might point both ways, or maybe even in different directions entirely, which implies that policy should really focus on coercion wherever it happens, not just the mode of delivery online versus offline.
So given all this, what are the implications for public policy? If the Nordic model's effectiveness is patchy, maybe even counterproductive in some ways, what are the alternatives?
Well, the article and our background material do introduce some fascinating countermodels that are definitely worth weighing up. Precisely. Instead of these blanket buyer bans, we're seeing other countries advancing models grounded much more in worker agency and, crucially, formal labor rights.
Like who?
Take Belgium, for example. In 2022, it became the first European country to fully decriminalize sex work. And then in 2024, it went further, granting sex workers formal labor rights.
Labor rights. Like what?
Entitlements to sick leave, maternity pay, even pensions. And brothels now need permits. They have to comply with health and safety standards. It's treating it like other forms of work.
And how's that going? Any early results?
Amnesty International noted better police cooperation, which is key, and an uptick in STI testing. Now, the permit rollout has apparently been slow, but it clearly shows how labor law, rather than criminal law, can be used to target harms and formalize protections.
A very different philosophy.
Completely. Then there's New Zealand. They decriminalized both the sale and purchase of sex way back in 2003.
With zoning rules and opt-in licensing, I remember reading.
That's right. And government reviews there consistently report no rise in trafficking and, importantly, increase reporting of violence to the police.
Yeah.
Because workers feel safer doing so.
So that provides long-term data challenging that inevitable exploitation narrative.
Exactly. It shows another path is possible.
Australia's also experimenting, isn't it? Different states, different models.
Yes, the states of Victoria and Queensland, for instance. In 2022-2023, they phased out buyer penalties and introduced safety inspections and anti-discrimination protections instead.
And the results there.
Early indicators suggest violence complaints are actually down and condom use has remained stable.
So these examples show a more nuanced, maybe regulatory approach instead of just blanket bans, focused on safety and rights.
A regulatory gradation, yes, targeting specific harms. But beyond these specific policy models, there are larger forces at play that The Economist article, understandably given its scope, underplays a bit.
These are crucial for the full picture.
Absolutely.
Okay, like what?
Well, a key factor is the role of platform governance.
You mean the companies themselves, like OnlyFans, payment processors?
Exactly. Companies like Stripe, MasterCard, and yes, UK-based OnlyFans. They already run quite strict Know Your Customer KYC checks. And anti-child sexual abuse material, see up full filters, often these are actually much stricter than national laws.
So Sweden's new ban, what's the risk?
It risks pushing payments underground towards opaque processors where there's less oversight, which seems counterintuitive if your goal is protection.
So it could actually hamper oversight, not improve it.
That's a critical point, yeah. Are we inadvertently undermining existing safeguards? Plus, the ongoing EU digital services debate is actively looking at this very issue.
Oh, really? What are they doing?
Brussels is funding projects to craft labor rights frameworks specifically for gig economy sex work. Things like caps on how much third-party platforms can take, and giving creators veto rights over content use.
That sounds quite progressive, focusing on worker protections again.
Very much so. A different philosophy than pure criminalization.
And another powerful force we touched on earlier, the generational norms.
Right, the Gen Z perspective.
Polls showing half of them don't classify sugaring as sex work.
Criminalizing their consumption behavior. Well, it might just erode respect for the law itself.
Echoing maybe past failures with things like minor drug prohibition.
Potentially. It highlights a significant disconnect between this kind of policy and how society, or at least parts of it, are evolving.
And finally, you mentioned migration and inequality. How does that fit in?
Hugely important. Up to 80% of Sweden's in-person sex workers are estimated to be migrants.
80% again. Wow.
So buyer-focused policing, even if it technically doesn't criminalize the seller.
It still affects them.
It still leads to encounters with law enforcement, potential deportations, definitely lost income, which directly contradicts the Nordic model's supposed protective aim.
And disproportionately impacts already vulnerable populations.
Precisely. It could end up creating more hardship, not less, for the very people it claims to help.
So wrapping this up, what's the bottom line here for you, our listener? It really seems like Sweden is essentially trying to apply a 1990s policy playbook to a 2025 digital marketplace. Does that sound fair?
I think that's a reasonable summary. The new ban will almost certainly chill some payments going through Swedish banks, yes, but history and the dynamics we've discussed suggest it may have quite a few unintended consequences.
Such as?
Well, it's likely this will displace demand, either to foreign platforms or opaque payment channels, or simply drive more sex tourism abroad. It risks increasing stigma and legal risk for performers, especially vulnerable groups like migrants and trans creators, without actually dismantling the coercive networks that are the real problem.
And crucially, it could divert precious police attention and resources away from genuine trafficking investigations.
Which, disappointingly, already produce very few convictions in Sweden. That's a real concern.
It really makes you stop and think about the true purpose of laws like this, doesn't it? Is it about expressing public morality, or is it about genuinely effective harm reduction?
And countries genuinely seeking to curb abuse, both offline and online, have a much richer body of evidence to draw on in 2025 than Sweden did back in 1999.
And that evidence points where?
Increasingly, it points toward these labor rights frameworks, coupled with targeted anti-exploitation enforcement, not blanket buyer bans. Sweden's digital Nordic model might therefore generate more headlines than actual measurable harm reduction.
So the real test is yet to come.
Absolutely. The real test will be in the data over the next 5 years. Look at trafficking prosecutions, STI rates, sex worker income security. These are the metrics that, thus far, the Nordic approach has really struggled to consistently improve.
A lot to consider, wouldn't you say? It leaves you with that question, really.
Sure.
Are we designing policies for the world we perhaps wish existed, or for the complex, messy reality that actually does? Thank you for joining us for this exploration. We hope this has given you a richer, maybe more nuanced understanding of this really evolving landscape.